identity and solidifying voice. We're really excited to have all of you here today. It's great to see some faces. I'll be sharing a PowerPoint presentation, so you'll be able to follow along, but for the first couple minutes, we just thought it would be nice if we could just say hi to everyone and check in. And like Jordan mentioned, we really want people to participate. This is for all of you. So please use the chat function whenever you feel like, if you have a question, whether you want to bring it up like in the moment or afterwards. We really want to hear from you because this is really about all of you. And yeah, we can get started.
Also, the raise the hand function, if you want to say something, there's something under participants. If you go to participants, there's a little icon that says raise hand. So anytime any one of you want to ask a question, just click that button. And when we see it, we'll invite you to talk. So, and also Anushka is going to be doing a little exercise where we're going to ask you guys some questions, and we would like it if you would type it in the chat box. So again, at the bottom, there's a chat icon. So you just click on that, your chat windows will appear, and we'd love to hear from you. It's just going to be a few words we ask you to type. So, so please help us out with that.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started.
Real quick, if you want to ask any questions, if you don't feel like, if you don't feel comfortable asking the whole group on the everyone chat, send your questions directly to Anushka or to Kay. They're the ones who are in charge of this project. And if you have questions about literary legacies, please direct them to me. And I definitely want to say thank you to Gabriella and to Suman and to Jordan and the representatives from California to Chicago to New York for representing the collaborative effort on this project. So thank you everybody for coming.
Great, thank you. Can everyone see my screen? Are we good? Awesome. Okay. So yeah, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have all of you here. And today's session really is about learning how to reclaim your identity through writing. And before we get started, I'm just gonna do a little short intro so we can get to know each other. But hi, I'm Anushka. I'll be leading today's session. And I graduated from Wesleyan University in Connecticut this year. I was studying government and economics, and I was a writing tutor at my school. I've always loved writing, and I'm really excited to talk about it with all of you today and hear what you have to say. And yeah, and today, like I was saying, the focus of today's webinar really is about learning how to reclaim your identity through writing. And since the focus is identity, that also means the focus is you, because you're the only one who knows how to understand and like explain your identity. So once again, like we mentioned, sorry to repeat it, but please raise your hand if you want to say anything. We would love to hear from you. And there will be like a special section where we do an icebreaker, where like we would really encourage everyone to participate. And before we get started, again, I'll give it to David to tell us a little bit more about Literary Legacies, which is the organization that's organizing this entire thing. So yeah, I'll hand it off now.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Chappelle. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, California. Went to Arizona State University, and I have a couple master's degrees, but that's just my brief resume. I started Literary Legacies in 2016. We were incorporated in 2017, and the purpose was, well, I wrote my own novel, Age of the Great Prophets, in 2012. I wrote that as a healing mechanism for some health issues that I was having. And when I realized the power of writing, I wanted to bring that to young people in my community back home in Morgan Hill, California. So I started Literary Legacies with our first student, Riyani Patel, who is now a nationally published author. Her book just got published on November 3rd. And I want to bring that same inspiration and power of healing and power of identity like we're doing today, and confidence and just growth through the writing process. So we've completed 15 books so far. We've published 14, and we're hoping that you all can join us with publishing our very next book. So thank you all very much for coming, and we're excited to have each of you join Literary Legacies one day. So I will pass it to Kay Aurora, who is our vice president, and she's going to be the head editor of this project. So Kay, take it over.
Okay, thank you, David. So I'm Kay. I'm going to be the editor of the anthology that we're going to ask you guys to write for, and we're titling it We See Ourselves. This is made possible with a grant from American Association of University Women in Morgan Hill. And what I want to tell you about Literary Legacies is we're a really special organization because we pair every student who wants to write with a mentor. So the mentor takes the student from the very idea that they have about writing a book to the end, to actually getting it published. And they're with you every step of the way. So like David said, we have 14 authors that are published, and we'd like to work with you now. And if you join us, we'll be there with you, like I said, every step of the way. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit more about this anthology. But first, I want to give you an example of an anthology that's inspired us. So let's move to the next slide. This is one that Anushka and I really liked. It's called Black Enough. And the editor writes the reason why she got this anthology, why she brought people together to write in it. And she says, my hope is that Black Enough will encourage all Black teens to be their free, uninhibited selves without the constraints of being Black, too Black, or not Black enough. They will simply be enough, just as they are. So that's our inspiration for teens, is you can really be yourself and talk about yourself. Like Anushka said, you're the owner of your own identity. You know best how to describe yourself. And so often, you know, teenagers, all of us feel like we're not seen in the ways we want to be seen. People are interpreting, putting their own thoughts on us, their own stereotypes. And so this is a chance to really show how you want to be seen. And that can be really, really freeing. So that's why we're titling it, We See Ourselves. At the end of the presentation, we're going to give you a Google form link, and that's where you'll get started filling out so we know a little bit about you, and then we will contact you to find out more and see if what you're interested in, we're interested in working together to get you published for the anthology. So I'll hand it back to Anushka and we'll get started.
Great, thank you, David and Kay, for giving us a little bit more information and insight. Like I mentioned, in case you just joined, my name is Anushka and I'll be hosting today's webinar. And the focus of today's webinar really is about your identity. And so, of course, from there, the first question comes up is, what is identity? And I think that that's a really big question that people take maybe like a lifetime to figure out. But for right now, we're going to think about identity in terms of the different social aspects that make us who we are. So this could be race, this could be gender, this could be class, religion, sexuality, your personality, your family history. And so we're going to also be talking about how all of these different bits and pieces come together to then create your entire whole, right? Your whole identity, who you are. And so that's really the focus and the goal of today. And I like to go over the structure of today's session a little bit, just so you guys have an idea of what we'll be doing. So first, we'll be talking about identity, which is the theme throughout. And then we'll move on to the icebreaker, which is basically a little like fun brainstorming exercise we're going to do together so we get to know each other a little bit. And this is really where we would love you guys to participate, where you can raise your hand and speak and share with the group. And you can also type in the chat box if you don't feel like raising your hand, but we'd like everyone to type in the chat box because that way we get to like see like who you are and where you're from and what your ideas are. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll go over craft, which is just fancy word for like skills and like a couple of technical things about how to write about identity. And in that part, we'll really be looking at one of the short stories in the anthology that Kay mentioned. And that short story is called Half a Moon by Renee Watson. And so we'll be picking at like specific examples from that story to kind of understand the different ways that the author tries to talk about identity. Okay, so this is our fun identity slide, which has a lot of images, which I chose because I think they help us understand what identity is. I think at first glance, it might not seem that way, but the first image that we have on the left is a Venn diagram. And I think that personally, I think that Venn diagrams can say a lot about identity just because they show us the different circles that overlap, the parts that don't. And each circle could be an aspect of your identity, but the point is that they all exist together, and you can see that in that like middle like joint section. And the other photos I have on the right are supposed to help us visualize how identity is also layered. So you could, for example, you could identify as a boy, you could identify as Latinx, you could identify as queer, you could identify as middle class. But the point is that you're not just one of those things, right? You're all of those things. And so that's really what we're trying to get at when we're talking about identity, is that you have all of those different parts of you that make you unique in who you are. And I think that those images on the left are just really there to help us visualize like the different layers and shapes, and that it's like it's three-dimensional or multi-dimensional, right? It's not like a flat surface. It has like multiple layers and dimensions. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about why I think writing about identity is important and fun. Personally, I think that it's always fun to write about identity just because it lets you think about your past. It also helps you think about the present, and it tells us about like our future, what we want to be. And so writing becomes a great way to like access and visualize your identity, even if it's something that's confusing, or if it's something that you don't understand. It's still a great way, and it's a great tool. And I think another part about writing, which I've slowly learned, is that it creates a very cool space where you're not just the reader anymore. Like you're not just on the receiving end, you're creating things with your own words. And I think that's very powerful and brave. And so we're really excited that some of you will be helping us in this new project. So we're at our icebreaker exercise now. And this is just a little exercise that we'll do together. And what I'd like is for all of you to think of 2 words that describe you or your identity. And you can pick those words from some of the categories that are up on the slide. So you could give us a word that says something about your race or your culture or where you're from or your personality. I don't want you to feel like restricted to those categories. Those are just there to help you think of the words. But yeah, we just love to hear your name, how old you are, and 2 words that describe you or your identity. So if anybody wants to raise their hand and share, that would be great. We really want to see who's out there and who's joining us. So this is your time.
Just 2 words. All right, I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna write mine in the chat.
Yeah, and if you you can also, we want everyone to write it in the chat, please. So your name, how old you are, and 2 words that describe you or your identity. And have fun with it. Tell us whatever you want us to know.
If anyone's having trouble finding the chat box, it's usually at the bottom of your screen, but it can also be under participants. Okay, here we go.
Oh yeah, great. We're getting lots of cool descriptions. I see multicultural. I see Hispanic, journalist, Indian American, introverted. Thank you for sharing. Also very brave. But yeah, I'll wait for more of those to come in. But while you're writing about that, I think it would also be great if you could think about why you chose the 2 words that you chose. So why were those 2 words important to you? Why were those the ones that came to mind? And I know these are difficult questions. I honestly have trouble with these questions. So yeah, you're doing a great job, everyone. I think I'll move on unless anybody wants to share and raise their hand. This would be a good time if anyone feels like.
There's more coming in, Anushka.
Oh, we got some more. Yeah. A lot of creative people. Very cool. Creative with technology. Very cool. If anybody wants to share why they chose those 2 words, that would be fun. If not, I can continue.
Raise your hand if you want to share why you chose these words. And I'll take a look.
And remember, if you're raising your hand in person, I may not see you, so you have to use the little raise your hand function beside your name.
Yeah.
Inside the participants box. It's not that easy to find. So. A lot of great answers here, though.
Oh, Gabriella.
Well, we might as well. Let me lead by example.
Great, thank you.
So I chose, Afro-Latina because I think it gets at a lot of things at once. So like, obviously, right, racially, I'm Black, but Latino doesn't have a race, it's an ethnicity, it's a culture. And so, so then obviously like my culture is Latina, and specifically, it opens the doors to explain, Dominican specifically. And then I put ambivert because I think like, working with people, and I do really love people, right? You got to be more social, but at the end of the day, like I am an introvert. I just know how to kind of navigate that because, one, because of my culture, it's a very extroverted culture, and then you have to. So yeah, but I think most people wouldn't think that I'm an introvert. They'd be shocked. They're like, what?
That's great. Thank you for sharing. I think Suman also wrote something in the chat. I can read that out loud unless you want to, Suman. You can go ahead if you feel like. I know you can't put your video on, but.
Sure. So I put these 2 words, agnostic and multicultural. These 2 are the words that have shaped me and affected me the most in my life. The fact that I'm agnostic, which means I don't quite know whether to believe or disbelieve in there being a God or not. And I've always been in a spiritual search to understand myself and the universe. How did it come into being? What is my part in it? Does it matter? All those kinds of things. It's just always troubled me a lot, if that's the word. And also I'm multicultural. I'm Indian, which from India, because a lot of Indians here my father's from Bengal, and then my mom's half Tibetan, half Burmese. We lived in this very British-centric parts of India. My father being an army officer, sometimes I guess we were more British than the British themselves, which was confusing. And now that I'm older and now living in the West. So those are all my reasons.
That's great. Thank you both for sharing. I don't even know if I need to do my example. That was amazing.
Thank you.
But yeah, I was just gonna bring up myself as an example of thinking about why I chose the 2 words I chose. I realized I didn't write them in the chat, but the 2 words I chose were South Asian and girl. And I think I chose South Asian similar to what Gabriella and Suman said in terms of how it brings up, I mean, I guess it is technically my race, but I think more importantly than that, it's also my history, it's my heritage, it's my culture, it's where I can visualize myself geographically. And the second word I used was girl, which I had a lot of trouble with actually explaining why I chose that like I chose that to identify myself in terms of like, I guess it's like obvious when you see me. But I think more than that, I also chose both of those words because they're the parts of my identity that are the most vulnerable, or maybe the aspects that carry the strongest stereotypes or the most weight. And I think that that's because like a lot of identity is about power. And so on the surface, they're words that carry a lot of weight. And I think that I use both of those words, and I talk about them a lot in my writing because I want to challenge the stereotypes attached to those words. And at the same time, I think that those are the same words from which I found my power, because I find that I always look to like women of color to find my power, which is like could be like role models in my family or friends, or just like amazing like women who are doing great things. So yeah, those are my reasons. We can move on. But yeah, the whole point of this exercise really was to talk about something, a concept, which I think a word that's thrown around a lot, which is intersectionality. And I think that it's tough to understand and to explain, but I think just by listening to what Gabriella said and what Suman said, that it's already explained in terms of how there are all these little pieces that make up who we are, right? It's not like you show up to work one day or you show up at school one day and you're just a girl or you're just Afro-Latina. Like you're both of those things. And so that's really what we're trying to get at when we talk about identity and when we write about identity, because you are all of those things at the same time. And that's part of the reason why we chose that specific story in Black Enough, which is called Half a Moon. We just thought that, Kay and I thought that the author just did a great job of showing us so many different aspects of her identity in terms of her race, her class, her family life. And so we're really excited to go through that with you guys and use that story as an example. Okay, so we're moving on to our third part of our webinar, which is talking about these different skills and like different ways in which you can really bring up identity in your writing. So these are the main concepts that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about narrative arc, we'll talk about plot, setting, dialogue, and character development. And I'm sure that these are words that a lot of you have already come across in like English and like creative writing classes. But just remember, when we're going through these examples, what we're really looking at is how the narrator is talking about their identity. Okay, so the first one that we're talking about is narrative arc. But before we get like into the very specific examples, I just want to give a brief synopsis of the story because I know you haven't read it. So the story is called Half a Moon, and it's by Renee Watson, and it's in this book, Black Enough, which I have like made a lot of notes in. But the protagonist in the story, or the main character, is a 17-year-old Black girl who is working at a camp as a camp counselor for 6th graders. And we learned that when the protagonist was 7 years old, her father left her and her mother because he had a child with someone else and went to go live with his new family. And so we learned that when the narrator was 7 years old, her half sister Brooke was born, and she doesn't really know this sister at all because like she lives with a different family, and as a result, she has like a lot of complicated feelings towards her. And the story really revolves around her now when she's 17. So our narrator is 17 and she's working as a camp counselor to help support her mom and to make extra money and like pay their bills. And the camp is an annual camp that's just for Black girls who live in the Portland area. And once the narrator gets to camp, we really see the conflict in the situation, because that's when she finds out that her half sister Brooke is also there, and she's like very surprised and a bit uneasy about it. And later on, we find out that Brooke, the half sister, is being bullied by the other campers, and the narrator sees some of this but doesn't really step in because she can't figure out if that's her role in the situation. And I'm going to stop there because we're gonna look at the rest of the story together through examples. But I also have this image up here, which I think people have probably seen. It's like the regular like story arc upside down tick mark idea of like how a story really like evolves, or how like the story moves. And so we start with the exposition, right, which is the flat line at the bottom you can see. And that's really just like the initial information we're given, the background information about the narrator and their situation. After that, we have the rising action, which is when we see like some kind of momentum, learn about, like we usually learn about an obstacle or a problem the character is facing. And that leads us to the climax, which is the height of the story. It's the inciting incident. It's usually a turning point and involves action and is part of the scene. And then following the climax, we have the falling action, which is basically the events that happen after the climax and then lead us to the resolution, which is how the story is tied up and once the conflict is resolved. So Kay is actually going to help me in this bit where we're going to go through narrative arc in this particular story and go through each different phase, and just talk a little bit about how we see the author like processing the story. So I'll turn it to Kay.
Okay, so she tells the story day by day that she's at the camp. So she starts with day 1, Sunday. Dad left when I was 7 years old. 7 was camping trips and looking up at the night sky with Dad, pointing to the stars that look like polka dots decorating the sky. So I really like the way she's personified the age 7. 7 was camping trips. And then she does the same thing for 17. So she says, and now 17 is spending my spring break working at Oak Creek's campgrounds as a teen counselor for, 6th graders.
Great. And so this is, we thought this was a great example of exposition because, like we mentioned, you're given like initial information. We see like what was happening when she was younger, when she was 7, and then we also see where she's situated now. Like we know that the story really is when she's at camp as a counselor.
Mm-hmm. So rising action. One of the blue campers said, you think because you got long hair and expensive things, you're all that. You could barely walk up the hill this morning. You need to go on a diet. I don't know what Brooke's hair and belongings have to do with her weight. Sometimes it's easier to be mean to a person than to admit that you wish you were that person.
Yeah, I really loved this entire excerpt, I think. So this is an example of when the narrator overhears people like being very rude to her, to Brooke, her half sister. And then her thoughts are really like what Kay read, that she says, sometimes it's easier to be mean to a person than to admit that you wish you were that person. And I think that sentence gives us a lot of information about the conflict in their relationship, and we can see the narrator's thoughts through this. So we can see that she's struggling with something that could be internal or external, but I think in this case it's more internal because she's struggling with her feelings towards her sister. And so this is a great example of rising action because we see that the conflict is introduced through the feelings of the narrator and through her reflection based on an interaction that she sees that her like sister is part of.
So the conflict is how she's gonna get along with her sister, who she wasn't expecting to be on this trip. And she already has mixed feelings about her. But what's great about this, what's highlighted, sometimes it's easier to be mean to a person than to admit that you wish you were that person. When they're making fun of her sister, she's already kind of questioning, you know, her own feelings about her sister. And, you know, should she have bad feelings about her, or is it more like she's jealous of her? So sometimes in a story, when things are a little complicated and messy, it makes it a lot more interesting. So then we reach the climax, which is day 6 on Friday. And she says, I am 17 and my father's daughter is out wandering in the rain.
Yeah, and this sentence we thought was also super powerful. Like it's just one sentence, right? But it already creates this kind of like anxiety because like we know that her little sister is basically like missing and is like in the middle of the woods. And so I think we consider this to be the climax because this is the height of the story, right? The sister is missing and the narrator has to decide that she wants to go find her, and then she goes into the woods and she looks for her. So this is really a moment where something shifts in the story and she like rises to the occasion and she goes and she looks for her sister who she actually like maybe doesn't know that well. And so yeah, this is just like it's a good example of how someone maybe like changes their mind about something that they felt earlier, and how they learned something about their identity in the process, because through this entire situation she also like comes in to step into the role of being an older sister who like takes care of her younger sibling.
Mm-hmm. So then we have the falling action. The tree house is more like a tree mansion. Not only did Brooke find it, but when I knock and the door opens, she is inside, sitting at a small kitchen table, drinking hot apple cider with a gray-haired woman.
Right, so eventually what happens in the story is the narrator goes, looks for Brooke, and then finds her in this like weird tree house like mansion. And so this is the falling action because the height of the story has kind of already passed, right? She's already gone to look for her younger sister, and now she's found her. So we're going closer and closer to the resolution where she comes to really like her feelings about her sister start to solidify, and you can see that there's like a change in the relationship.
Okay, and then day 7, Saturday. I have spent 7 whole days with my sister. Today is the last day of camp. Most time, I am happy to see the campers go. Most times, I am ready to get back to my regular life, but not this time.
Yeah, so this, I think these sentences, again, are like a great example of resolution because we can see here how the narrator has made a realization about her sister, right? She's taken on the role of the older sister and they've created a connection. And we can see this because she says that usually when she goes to camp, and she's been going since she was like in 6th grade herself, and she's never really attached to anyone. Like when she leaves, she doesn't feel sad. Like she's happy to see the campers go and like get back to her life. But that last sentence, which says, but not this time, really tells us that something has changed for her and she's overcome the conflict that she felt earlier in the story towards her sister. And just like the internal struggle she was going through about her sister and how her sister represented something that she didn't like because it meant that she lost her father in a way.
Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Because I can't see it anymore.
Yeah, we can still see it.
Oh, okay. I must have done something to hide it. I don't know how to get it back. Okay, I think I got it. Okay, go ahead, Anushka.
Alrighty. Sorry, I think I went too in front. Okay, here we are. So these are some more examples of how we see the plot of the story move forward. And all of them are from the same story, which is Half a Moon by Renee Watson. And so once again, Kay is going to read out the excerpts and we're just going to have a little bit of a dialogue about what these examples tell us and how they help the plot move. Once again, if anybody has anything they want to add, we would love to hear any thoughts you have. So you can always write it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and you can speak.
So Anushka is going to ask me some questions at the end. If anybody would like to jump in and answer them, we'd love to hear from you. So like she said, you could write it in the chat box or you could raise your hand. So I'll start off answering and then I would love to hear you guys chime in. So I'll read the passage first. Maybe she wasn't prepared to be on a camping trip with girls from North Portland. She lives in Lake Oswego. I doubt she's ever been around this many Black girls at once. I step back a bit, hide behind Natasha, the only other teen counselor I like in real life outside of camp. We work together every year. Natasha's family is the kind the kind you see in the frames at stores, the kind of greeting cards. So I don't tell her my father's daughter is on that bus.
Thank you. So the question I really had about this passage was I just wanted to know like 3 things that we learn about the narrator from this example. And if there are any things we learned that contribute to the plot of the story.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear from you guys. What are 3 things that stand out for you in this passage? I'll mention 3 that really stand out for me. So one right away is she says she lives in Lake Oswego, and the narrator is from North Portland. And she also says, I doubt she's been around this many Black girls at once. So one thing we might kind of interpret or infer is that Lake Oswego is maybe somewhere outside of Portland, maybe not having such a large Black community. And another thing I notice is she says, Natasha's family is the kind you see in the frames at stores. So she kind of idealizes her family and says, you know, she's like a greeting card Hallmark kind of family. And then she feels a little bit frustrated at telling her that she's from a broken family. So, so there's a lot going on in this passage. And one thing I found really, really interesting is that she's telling us about herself through subtraction. So she's not saying, this is who I am. She's saying, this is what Brooke is, and this is what Natasha is. And through comparison and contrast, we figure out that the narrator is not those things, right? She's not from like a suburb. She's not the kind of family you see on greeting cards. So it's like through a process of subtraction that we're figuring out what the narrator is like, which is a really interesting device in her writing.
Okay, there's a
For sure.
response
Yeah, we have
in the chat. There's a couple now.
There's some responses in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll read them. Armand Sharma, thank you, says, I think it's great, more are coming in, but now I have to scroll back.
She seems jealous of Natasha's family and of her sister's socioeconomic situation, Armand says.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then Natalia says, Lake Oswego is one of the elitist places around Portland. Yeah, I think Natalia has lived in Oregon, so she might know that. Sarah Rodriguez says she seems to be ashamed of her own family in a certain way. I definitely see that. Suman says she is embarrassed and not still comfortable with herself. So those are great observations. I can't wait to hear more from you guys as we move on. So let's move
those
to
are
the,
great.
Yeah, let's move to
Keep
the
those
next
coming
slide.
as we move on.
Yeah.
So this is the next example that we'll talk about. And before Kay reads the passage, I think this one is a really interesting one in terms of how we see how the narrator constructs her own sense of community and family. And we can see that Brooke is maybe not in this idea of family for the narrator.
Okay, so she says, another time I saw her at Jefferson's homecoming football game. The whole community was out, and my aunt kept joking about how you can't be Black in Portland and not know every other Black person. Somehow, some way, it's like a family reunion, she said, except Brooke is not my family. She's the girl who broke my family. So what do you guys notice here in this passage? What really stands out from you? What's the tone of the story? And Jordan, if I'm having a hard time seeing everything, if you can see them, would you mind reading?
Yeah, if Anushka can do that, because I'm actually going to have to go a little earlier than I thought.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
I can see it.
apologize. She can see it.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay, great.
Armand says she resents and blames Brooke for her father leaving, suggesting that she still is negatively affected by her father's absence.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. And I think that it also is interesting because it hints, and I think that's what Armand's saying, is that it hints at the conflict, right? We realize that Brooke isn't someone that she likes. So the tone is a little bit, we can see that she's not feeling particularly attached to Brooke because she's resentful, like Armand noticed. So that's great.
Yeah, and again, I think she's telling us things about herself through subtraction. And also I really like how those two sentences are statements that are really emphatic. Except Brooke is not my family. She's the girl who broke my family. It's she really puts a stamp on it with the last sentence, right? Where we really get her tone coming through. So yeah, let's move on to the next one.
So this is our last plot example. Yeah, he wants to read the passage.
Oh yeah, Brooke doesn't notice me. She's occupied with pulling her designer suitcase with one hand and holding her sleeping bag with the other. She looks like she's prepared to go to a fancy resort, not a muddy campground. I think about all the money Dad must have spent on her name brand clothes and shoes, her hair and manicures. This camp, she's probably only one of the few girls who paid full tuition.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting paragraph because they bring up class, and I think that the author does that in the whole short story, really. And I think that's something which is sometimes uncomfortable for people to talk about, but it's a really important part of life. And so how do you think, what do you guys think about, how do you think this tells us about character development? Do we see anything happening in terms of the narrator and how she thinks about Brooke? Like, how does that help us understand the narrator a little bit more?
Well, I'll just say a few things. I think that when she says her name brand clothes, her shoes, her hair, her manicures, she's kind of like portraying Brooke as a wealthy girl, a privileged girl. And she's describing her in all of these feminine ways. So she's constructing a certain kind of femininity that goes with wealth and privilege. And so that really stood out for me. And again, I think Armand is saying that this reveals she comes from a lower socioeconomic status than Brooke, and that there's some envy going on over her fancy items. And one thing that, and I think that's totally spot on. And one thing that really stands out for me is like, she never really says, I am envious of Brooke, right? We never see her say that, but we know it from how she's describing Brooke. That one sentence that Anushka's highlighted, really, it comes through that she is resentful and hurt that her dad has spent all this money on her half-sister and not on her. But she never has to say it. Like in a lot of writing classes, people say, show, don't tell. A lot of writing teachers will tell you that. And this is a perfect example of that because she's showing her feelings rather than telling us her feelings.
Yeah, exactly. So we have one more thing that I'll read. Sarah says she has negative feelings towards Brooke. She feels jealousy and it seems she's conflicted on the subject of her family. Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly what it is. And the key word there really is conflict, because we see that she's struggling to understand how she feels in terms of her sister. I'm so happy that we see lots of people responding, but I'm going to move on just because I don't want us to be here for too long. And so the next concept that we're going to talk about is setting. And setting is really important because it grounds us in space and time. And it also sets the scene and can help to build tension. So let's see how we see setting in Half the Moon.
The annual camp is for Black girls living in the Portland metro area. Mrs. Thompson created the camp because she felt Black teens in Portland needed to learn about and appreciate the nature all around us.
Right. And so my question really is, what does the setting tell us about the camp?
Well, one thing is like the importance of nature for these city girls, right? And then another thing that really stands out is that Brooke and the narrator are half sisters, and they're here at this camp away from their families, and they're all Black girls at a camp. So in a way that equalizes them. Whereas if they were out with their families, they'd be noticing all these other divisions. But even though she notices that Brooke is different from her in terms of wealth, just being at a camp with her, kind of around nature and not with their families, kind of helps to equalize the plane so we can see them relate to each other out in nature that way.
Yeah, for sure. This is our other setting example. And we think that this example brings in setting, but it also advances the plot. So let's see.
Yeah, so the sun has said good night, and now we are sitting under an ocean of stars. They shimmer like the glitter I once used on a Father's Day card. It was after Dad left us. I never sent it.
So do you think the setting in this description tells us something about the narrator's feelings? And what is the metaphor that she uses to bring in her feelings and advance the plot?
Yeah, I really like the metaphor she's using here. So not only is it important to know that it's nighttime, the sun is set, but then when she compares the stars to glitter, and she takes us into her writing her Father's Day card and putting glitter on it, it brings up really strong feelings for her about when her dad left them, and then she never sent it. So right in this few sentences, we're seeing a lot of ambivalent feelings towards her dad. And the glitter being like the stars is a really nice metaphor to bring all those feelings out.
Yeah, great. We're going to move on to dialogue. So dialogue is really important because, especially in scenes, because it creates momentum. So time moves a lot faster when we see dialogue, and it can be the source of information about characters. It also reveals a lot about the relationship between characters. So let's see what the examples are that we have for dialogue. And before we actually read this example, just to give some more context, this is right before Brooke has wandered off into the woods, and the narrator goes to look for her. And so when she finds her in the tree-like mansion with the old woman, this is the dialogue that ensues.
And what a thoughtful big sister you have, the woman continues, to come looking for you. Brooke blurts out, she's my half sister. I'm not sure if she meant to hurt me or if she's just telling the truth. Maybe both. The old woman says, there's no such thing as a half sister. She walks to the door, opens it. Just like the moon, she says, there's no such thing as a half moon either.
Yeah, I think this is a really great example because it tells us a lot about the relationship between the narrator and Brooke, and also how that's changed since the beginning of the story. So what do you guys think is significant about this dialogue? And you can raise your hand, you can answer in the chat, but what really comes out through this?
Well, one thing that I'm noticing, I want to hear from all of you too, but one thing I'm noticing is that there's another metaphor here. So the moon, the half moon and the half sister, it's, you know, I think the narrator is coming to learn something, right? The conflict that we saw earlier was, how is she going to relate to her half sister when she meets her at the camp, and she's not sure, she has mixed feelings. But here is something of a resolution where the narrator is coming to realize that maybe she needs to embrace Brooke as a full sister, because this elder lady is saying there's nothing like a half moon. So how can you have a half sister? Even though you're only seeing half of the moon, doesn't mean it's just a half a moon. So she's asking her to fully embrace her sister. And I think this is really, really nicely told.
Exactly. I think you have some people writing in the chat. I think Armand said exactly that. Armand said, even if you can't see the full moon in the night sky, there's still another half there, just like people's identity. You may not be able to view someone's full identity, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think I didn't even really think about it in that way, but you're right. It just is a great metaphor for how there's so many parts of people we don't see. And in this story, we see how she comes to see those different parts of like her sister's identity, but also her own, right? So that's really great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so here we're almost coming towards the end of our webinar, but I just wanted to make people think a little bit more about how we saw the author bring up identity in the story. So we see them do it through race and class. We see them do it through gender. And I left the third one blank if anyone wants to chime in. But yeah, I don't know if people have any thoughts about other ways they remember from the examples. Otherwise, we can continue. Okay. Yeah, we're almost at our end. So I just wanted to leave everyone with a couple concrete things to remember before we finish today's session. And I think one of the most important things from the story is we understand the narrator's identity through the internal struggle she faces with her half-sister Brooke. And so she builds the story around her community and her family, and she makes very clear distinctions between people who are included and are excluded from the group. So initially we see that Brooke is very much on the outside, right? She's not, the narrator doesn't consider her to be in that like in-group family place. And then we see this change, we see this develop throughout the story where they create a connection and she goes to find her. And like through that last example, like Armand mentioned, we see how she sees different parts of her sister and she's able to understand herself better through that. And also, I think another thing we notice is how, like Kay mentioned earlier, how the narrator uses subtraction. So we learn who she is by her telling us what she's not. So she doesn't have designer suitcases like Brooke. She doesn't have the perfect family like Natasha. And that's also a really interesting technique I think we can use in writing, is like comparing yourself to other people. So you're actually saying, you're revealing a lot more about who you are by saying you're not like this. And yeah, I think I just want people to remember that like writing about your identity is hard and confusing, but it's also very powerful. And I think that everyone has a lot to say. It's just that we like struggle with the words to do so, but I'm sure that all of you have a lot to share, and we would love to hear your writing and your thoughts. And if anybody has any questions about anything we spoke about that didn't make sense or any concerns, we would love to hear from you. I think some people are writing in the chat. Yeah. And before people log off, it would be very helpful if everyone could just drop their email addresses in the chat box, because we'll be sending you a link to the Google form, which is like the application for the anthology project that Kay and David mentioned earlier, the anthology that will be called We See Ourselves. So if you give us your email, we can send you the form, you can fill that out, and then yeah, maybe you can, this is a great opportunity for you to be able to work more on your writing and to publish something, and to work with a mentor. It's really, I think it's really valuable experience. So thank
Yeah.
you all so much for coming.
And I'm going to type the Google link in the chat box too. So you guys can go there
Perfect.
right now and fill out the form right now if you want. And thank you for typing in your emails and thanks for coming. If you like this, this program today, we have another one coming up. And if you go to the next slide, we have another event, December 12th, 11 a.m. Pacific via Zoom. And this one is with the author Stephen Dunn. He's going to come himself and talk about his books, his 2 novels. And the title of the seminar is Writing Sentences That Feel. So youth and adults will cover strategies that will help our sentences feel like what they're describing by looking at movement, texture, and sound. Another great instructional webinar, and we hope to see you guys there. This was so fabulous, you guys. Thank you for participating. And at 1 p.m. in Chicago time. That's right, Gabriella. So
I always have to remind them because they were telling me, they're like, I saw 1 to 2. I'm like, yes, it's California time, which also it's real. It really throws you off. And I hope, like, I don't know if students maybe had something else to share now that we have like that half hour, right? Is it, or no?
yeah,
Was it just 1 to 2? Okay. So if you guys
who wants to
like
sure.
wanted to say something before and you didn't get a chance to because it went too quick, this is a good opportunity, or questions you have. And Chami said that she enjoys the character development of the narrator and her half-sister. Me too.
What did you think? I know you guys haven't read the story. You just know it from the glimpses we gave you. But what was your favorite part of this story? What really stood out for you? I'm really, really curious to know. Don't be afraid to come on video and share it in person. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, even if you don't want to put your video on, you can just like unmute yourself and talk. I think we have someone. I can say something while other people think, I guess. I thought it was really interesting how I just really enjoyed how the author kind of took us through through a life situation that could be it could have been a very sad story. Like it could have been, not that you have to write happy stories, but families and broken families are very confusing, like complicated areas to navigate. And I think that it was really interesting how she turned it into something that told her something about, like, she learned something from the experience. Like there was some kind of self-education that happened through that. And I thought that was really, really cool. And also very brave to write about that.
I see that Armand says, I love the moon metaphor because I feel like that relates to everyone's lives. We all have parts of our identities that we suppress and try to hide in the night sky, but no matter how much we try to ignore it, we can't make that part of our identity disappear. That's really, really beautiful and well written, Armand. Yeah. And yeah, one other thing that's really, really impressive is the relationship between the 2 sisters, right? We hardly hear anything from Brooke. We don't really hear her speak that often, but we have a very, very good understanding about her from what the narrator tells us, right? But it's really the narrator taking us through her feelings, and it's her describing what's important to her. That's the main thing that's coming across that I can see. And that's what writing about identity means. You get to tell your own story. It's your own book. And so that's what I found really powerful in the story. And also when I write myself, I find that really powerful to be able to tell my story the way I want to tell it.
Yeah, I really liked that character who said that about the moon and stuff, because to me it was just it was interesting because it's like a choice of perspective. You can choose to see it as things appear, or you can choose to see it as just differently, you know, in a more growth mindset, I guess, kind of way.
Mhm.
We have one more.
Yeah, Trem
I
says,
think,
oh, go ahead, Anushka.
no worries. Go ahead.
Okay, so Trami says, I like how the narrator incorporated Brooke's fancy personal belongings. This projects the difference between their socioeconomic status and relationship with their father. Yeah, that was a really, really moving description that she gave of her personal belongings. And it really made us as readers really, really aware of what she's going through. So like we were saying, she showed rather than told us her feelings through the fancy belongings. So that's a great observation, Trami.
Yeah, and I think that that also kind of just reminds me of how like details are important. Like those little kind of details that I think sometimes we forget to include in our writing. They really stick with people, and they really carry the story in this like small but very like monumental way. So yeah, I think that's a great example.
And another thing I noticed, you know, I love Armand's comments about the night sky and seeing different facets of people. Earlier, I think he also commented that the narrator said she used to stargaze with her dad. So all the references to stars and moons, you can see kind of a pattern emerging that all have to also do with relationships. So that's another great tool that writers can use, is to use metaphor and repetition. Suman is saying motif. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Suman?
I think you're muted. Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
I saw. Gosh, I never noticed that when I unmuted. So I was actually saying the same thing you said, Kay. Just the fact that the author used all the heavenly bodies, so to speak, of the night sky, the moon and the stars to describe relationships. That is the motif running through the entire thing. In fact, just the choice of half moon being the title of the story and how it just came together so beautifully at the end. I'm so impressed by this young 12-year-old writer. Yeah, I just wanted to say that that's the motif, the same pattern, the repetition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's basically a repetition of what you were saying.
There's a pattern emerging here.
Yes, yes.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. I don't know if anybody has any more comments or if they have any questions. We're here if you want to ask us anything. I can stay for a couple minutes afterwards if anybody wants to ask anything after people start heading out. But thank you guys so much for being here. We're really excited to have the space with you, and we really hope you apply. You guys have great ideas. And yeah, this was really fun. Thank you so much.
And if you are one of my students, if you can do me a favor, I'm going to drop a survey in the chat myself. If you could just take a moment to fill that out, that would be awesome before you leave.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. We, like Anushka said, we'll stick around for a few minutes. Those of you that want to stay can stay, and those of you who want to leave can leave, but definitely fill out the Google form. You guys had great insights, so we'd love to work with you and get to know you a little better. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a good day or evening.
I see things coming in the chat box, lots of thank yous.
I'm just copying all of the emails so that we know who was here.
Yeah, and we'll send a follow-up email thanking you guys with the Google link. So, so look out for that. Okay, well, Anushka, I think we'll say goodbye to everybody. And
All right.
I feel like this isn't goodbye. I feel like we're all connected now, and we'll be having lots of interesting conversations. So just goodbye for now, everybody.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anushka, thank you, Kay. You two did. This was amazing. This was great. I really appreciate it. I look forward to this being like a permanent thing we do every year. So this is great. I just thank you for your work, and Gabrielle, of course, thank you. I think SGA has been such a great partner so far, and it's just going to keep growing as far as our connection with each other. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing your students.
I'm honestly so glad, and I'm
you
excited.
brought numbers.
I am excited to hear their stories. You know.
Yeah, I think it's really gonna help them as they kind of come into the latter part of their high school careers, like applying for school, and also like they're having to navigate college. You know, I think the hardest part about college for me was finding myself. Like a lot of the things that the young writer was talking about in the book is the same stuff that I was struggling with, as far as finding like that balance between am I there are some spaces I'm too black, there's some places I'm not black enough, and then there's some spaces like just me being black is the problem, right? So navigating all those three different things in this country is just such a challenge, and I think everybody on this call navigates that in some way, you know. So with their own ethnic, religious, like all the dynamics of your personality, you struggle with like when that can come out, and when is that a benefit, when does that hurt you, like how do you express yourself fully. And so I think these young people having a chance to really dive into that with the youth partner, with the mentor, like all those things, and having it structured is going to be a blessing in their lives, I think. So I'm excited.
I think so too, because there's a lot of people telling you what you are, and I'll say this: I think all the isms, whether that's classism, racism, sexism, all of it is just dehumanizing. And what I mean by that is like part of being human is being complex. You're more than just, you know, one thing, right? Like as you were saying, right, where that's like a definition. And I think that all those isms really minimize people to be basically caricatures and not real people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why I really like this, because it just helps, especially at that age. It's such a formative age of high school where that's where you really start figuring out like, who am I? Like, what am I about? What do I really like? What don't I like? I think it's important to start that and to facilitate speeding that up, because like Anushka was saying, that's a lifelong journey. Like that's something I'm still trying to figure out. And it's unlearning and throwing off all these things that were put on you, or maybe you put on yourself, that isn't actually your true self.
Mm-hmm. And what's great about a story like this is you see everyone's humanity, right? Like, you know what their identity is, how the world sees them, but what this young narrator, this young author had a chance to do was to show who she is. And I think that's going to be really, really powerful going forward with this project that we're starting.
Definitely. I think it was a good story to pick. I was very confused about, there were just like so many good ones. But I really like this one.
Thank you, Anushka. This is made possible largely because of you. So thank you so much for all the effort you put in this. And
thank you.
It's 100%. Thank
you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
I had fun.
Oh, good, good.
You guys were so wonderful. I just want to chime in quickly and say that it was amazing. I wish all the writing classes would be like this, so inspiring, so empowering. And I also wanted to add, because I lived in Portland, It is actually, it's not, but I mean, it would be cool to know some history facts from Portland, because while Portland is right now very democratic and very liberal, it was the most racist city before 1920s, I believe. So African American people were not allowed to sleep in a hotel in the center of Portland. They only had to go. So there's so much more to this story that you read, I feel like, you know. So it's amazing that there's someone who is interested in the story can go deeper, you know. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much. It was so great today.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know. Have you been on a call with Gabriella? So Gabriella's Natalia. She's on our board. I don't know if you two have met each other yet. So, and I don't know if you've met Anushka either, Natalia. So this is Anushka and this is Natalia. She's on our board. So.
I think we spoke on the phone.
Yes, we have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, so I think we're gonna have to trim this recording anyway, because it's gonna go long because Jordan's not here. So just like I said, I just want to thank you all so much for just all the support you've given to Literary Legacies, whether it's you're on the board or whether you're helping to run the project or just you're a partner. It was all four of you have been tremendous. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. Hope you guys have a good night.
Yeah, everybody, good night. All right, take care.
All right,
Bye,
take care.
everybody.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.